morning, ladies.
Good morning.
What a week of study we have had. It has been good.
Oh, yes.
And we have finally gotten to the application part. And there's much that we can do to be obedient to God and to His Word. And this morning we're going to dive in to, we're going to kind of do it a little different. We're going to dive into the first day and the last day of our study this week. And we'll kind of take out the middle part because those two really ended up being very well related to one another. And so I'm going to forego the typical review that I do with you where I ask you the same questions over and over. And because I really think that the assignment on day 5 did a really good job of reviewing the entire book of Hebrews. And so since that's what we're going to discuss, that's why I'm not going to do the review. So let us begin where our week began, in chapter 12, verses 18 through 24. And I thought what we could do this morning is we could read that section together and just kind of get our hearts settled back into this part of Hebrews and then get ready to run the book. So, run the race, run the book. Okay, so would someone like to read verses 18 through 24? It's kind of a long passage, so.
Wait, I'm so sorry, I missed.
Chapter 12,
chapter 12,
verses
okay.
18 through 24.
Okay, just wait a second.
I'll come to a mountain that may be touched, and to a blazing fire, and to darkness, and gloom, and whirlwind, and to the blast of a trumpet, and the sound of words, which sound was such that those who heard begged that no further word should be spoken to them. For they could not bear the command, if even a beast, thanks, right, new context, if even a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. And so terrible was that, they're going to have to read it, I can't see.
Oh, okay. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood which speaks better than the blood of Abel.
That's just such a neat
Yeah,
passage,
yeah.
I think. And thank you for reading, both of you.
Make
All of
picture.
you. Okay, so here we saw this contrast between an old mountain or a specific mountain and a new mountain, between the old covenant and the new covenant. And we looked at that on day 1. We were asked to compare, and I have to be real honest with you, I didn't think they had us comparing it the right way, but that's okay. So, however you made your list, basically it's talking about the old versus the new, okay? So I thought what we could do this morning is we could kind of review these things that are said about the old, and then also review the things that are said about the new. And then we'll talk about this new more. So, how is the mountain, how is the old described? I'm afraid I'm not going to use the right words so you'll understand. What is the old, how is it described?
It can be touched,
Mhm.
so it's physical.
Okay, it's physical. Is that what you gathered from that?
So it was a real mountain.
Right, okay. So I'm going to draw a real mountain.
Okay.
This is my real mountain. Get ready. Okay? This is awful. Okay.
And when I say real mountain, I mean physical.
Okay, so it was this mountain. And what mountain is it?
Sinai.
It's Sinai. Does it say it specifically there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, she has it in parentheses.
Right. Okay. And it can be touched. It's real. This is a physical mountain. It can be touched, but are they supposed to?
No.
Yeah. Okay, so it can be touched, but it's prohibited, right? Okay, so what else is said about this? What have they not come to? That's why I thought it was kind of weird the way they worded it, because it says you have not come to, and then it describes these things they have not come to instead of describing the mountain, which is a description of what was going on in the mountain, but I'm just so particular and weird. So anyway.
Well, when God was there, it had a blazing fire,
Okay, so there was a blazing fire.
which is curious because then it said darkness and gloom.
Yeah, there's darkness
Yeah.
and gloom.
And a whirlwind.
Oh, and a whirlwind.
And there were trumpets blasting.
Wow.
It had to scare them
Oh, I
so
think
much
so.
that they would not go near it.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, but was it that they wouldn't go near it, or that they were instructed
They were
not
not
to go to it?
Well, they were afraid to.
Yes, they were, but it's a combination,
Yeah.
right? So they're
Yeah.
told not to touch the mountain, right? And so, but would they, after they saw this, do you
Yeah,
think you would have
yeah.
been like, hey, let's go touch that?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, Rennie would.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe children, and maybe you had to keep the children away because Rennie burned her finger last night
Oh,
after
no.
being told not
Not
to touch
to.
something. So anyway, something hot. So,
Well, she learned her lesson.
right. Now, what did Moses say about this mountain? Because Moses is the one guy who went on the mountain, right? What did he say about it? What does it say in Hebrews about that?
I am full of fear and trembling.
So if he is full of fear and trembling, do you think that the people would have been full of possibly more fear and maybe a different kind of fear?
I was going to
Because-
say, sometimes people are too stupid to be afraid. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Right, or they're afraid of a physical thing, whereas he was afraid of God. This
Yes.
was a
Yes.
God-fearing,
Yes.
I am standing
Yeah.
on true holy ground, which the
Right.
Lord has touched on. And we went and we looked at our cross-references and we found out a little bit more, but it's very interesting because it says some of these things, but the Hebrews passage is kind of giving us just that little bit more information, right?
It is.
And that's what he's done all the way through the book. So he's full of fear and trembling. Did we get everything down that was we have not come to? I want to make sure we've got this look here, or this list here.
And the words. Sounds of words, which sound was such that those begged no further word be spoken.
Okay, so
there
they're
were some
speaking,
words.
right? So there's spoken word. And they were words that no one wanted to hear anymore. Please stop speaking to me, right? That's basically what they said. We can't handle anymore. You can go through Moses, right?
Yeah.
You tell Moses,
yeah.
and then
can tell
Moses,
us.
you can come tell us, because we can't handle this, right? And so this is an event, right? This is something spectacular and different, right? So then, in contrast to that, he goes on to say, and we know that it's a contrast because at the beginning of verse 22, what word do we see? But. And so, but you have come to, and so we have another mountain, right? So I'm going to draw another mountain. It's going to look kind of similar. You ready for a really great mountain? Okay. Oh, that doesn't even look like the top of a mountain. I'm trying to make it kind of craggy. I'm not real good at mountains, as you can see. You have come to a mountain, and what is it described as? What's the name of it?
Mount Zion.
Mount
Zion.
Zion. So this one was Mount Sinai, and this one is Mount Zion. And how is it described here? What else does it say we have come to?
The city of God.
The city of God.
With the living God.
Yeah, the living God. Okay, what else?
Heavenly Jerusalem.
To meet Jesus himself.
By this point, you should be pretty excited about this city that you have come to this mountain that you have come to
Angel.
Jesus.
Angels singing for joy.
How many?
Thousands.
Myriads of angels. I love a good word. That's a good word. Myriads of angels. What else?
To the General Assembly
The General Assembly.
and Church of the Firstborn.
I'm just gonna put church,
Okay.
okay?
In heaven, enrolled in heaven.
Okay, and if this is
That
a
would
general
be-
assembly and church that's enrolled in heaven,
Yes.
right? So it's in heaven. Okay. What else? What else have we come to?
God.
God,
And he's described as the judge of all.
the judge of some people,
All.
okay? And
To the spirits of righteous men made
we're
perfect.
running out of room already. Okay, spirits,
Of righteous men made perfect.
what kind of righteous men do you think it's talking about here? Have we seen any of these righteous men in Hebrews?
Yeah.
Hebrews 11.
Yeah, that hall of faith, right?
Right.
Their faith is what made them righteous, right? Okay, anything else? We already have
We have
Jesus. How is
Jesus.
Oh,
Jesus?
sprinkled with blood.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's the mediator.
He's the mediator of the
Okay.
new covenant.
Okay, let's
And to the
put
sprinkled
that.
blood.
Mediator. And to, there's one more, sprinkled blood. Goodness. That's a lot to meditate on, right?
Yes.
Now, what is different about this? I mean, besides these things that we've come to, what's different about this Mount Zion from this Mount Sinai? It's the very first thing that we talked about. It's the very first thing that he says when he starts the contrast in verse 18.
Well, they come there to meet, so they're allowed to touch the mountain, whereas in Sinai they're not.
You have not come to a mountain that you can touch, right? So, are you able to touch this
Yes.
one or not? What is it saying?
It's heavenly, it's
It's
spiritual.
it's a spiritual
Yeah.
mountain,
Yeah.
right? Now, will it someday be a real mountain? But he's saying, right now, you have come to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are we able to physically touch all of these
No.
things right now?
No.
No, so this is spiritual,
Right,
right?
right.
So it's okay if I put that right there?
So they go there to meet Jesus.
Right, and that's where he is, right? Because
Right.
he's already enthroned in heaven, right? And these things that are being described are things that are in heaven, right? Remember we did that cross-reference in Revelation where we saw the throne room of God, right? And so what did we see? Did we see angels? Yes, and did we see those, did we see God, the judge? And who's worthy to open the scroll and all of the, this picture of Revelation, right? Did we see these people? The spirit of those made righteous? We saw those in a couple of different places when we looked into this picture of heaven. Are they underneath the throne saying, "How long, O Lord, until you," I mean, and we're not going to go, I mean, we're not going to go there, but Revelation's so good.
It's so
good.
good.
It's so tempting just to go study it. But so we see some of these things here described in Hebrews. We see them also when John gets his revelation of heaven, when he gets a picture, a glimpse of heaven. So it agrees, right? These things are there too.
So in one mountain, we're only hearing, and the other mountain we're seeing.
Yes, and I love that you're saying that because...
It just came to me while you're drawing all this out.
Yes, because this is all very fuzzy, right?
Right.
It's covered in a whirlwind, right? And there's smoke coming out of there. It's almost
Right.
like a volcano, right? And we see in our cross-reference in Exodus and in our cross-reference in Deuteronomy that it says that God came down to the mountain, right? But did anybody see him?
Oh.
No, because he came in the midst of this. And so it was very hazy, right? There's darkness and there's gloom around it. So there's probably heavy cloud cover. So they might not have even been able to see the top of the mountain. You know how that is when it lays on top. So it's a very hazy idea. And all they're hearing is the sound of trumpets blasting And these words, and who's speaking these words?
God.
God himself. Can you imagine this picture and how fearful
Yeah.
and how trembling you would have been if this was what you saw? But like you said, Sheila, when we come to this spiritual mountain, all of those blinders, all of that mist, all of that haze, all the smoke is cleared, and we see clearly these specific things. We see Jesus. We see God the judge. We see myriads of angels. We see the spirits of the righteous made perfect. We see all of these things. So it's pretty exciting.
And it's
right?
going to be just as real, actually probably more so, just as real when we get there as that one must have seemed to them, only we'll be able to see it clearly.
We'll be able to
And
see
experience
it clearly. Yes.
it and all the people and things and beings who are there.
Right, and
I never
we
thought
will-
about it as being real. You hear me.
Yeah,
Right now it's kind of ethereal,
Yes.
but it's going to be real.
Absolutely real. And we looked at that when we glimpsed and we cross-referenced into chapter 21 and chapter 22 of
Yes.
Revelation, right? So we
Yeah.
just got that glimpse of
Yeah.
the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven. This is being described. So it's really just a wonderful cross-reference,
Right,
right? So
right.
if we do study Revelation, we'll have to keep in mind that we have some information for when we get there that's here in Hebrews, right? And it's also, and this is what blew my mind about Hebrews, and I've kind of like talked about it a little bit, but is that this right here is what Moses saw. He says, be careful to make it after the pattern that I have shown to you in the mountain.
Right.
This mountain,
Right.
he shows him the
Right.
pattern of this, and he goes down and he starts building this tabernacle. So the tabernacle that we study is a picture of God's throne room. That is just like, it was mind-blowing to me.
That's why they
how
had to
all of
do it.
Scripture comes together.
So perfectly. That's why they had to follow the directions.
Yes, and because it was going to point to that.
Right.
Excuse me. So we've got this really good comparison going on here, right? And the biggest part of that comparison is just exactly what you said, is that this is kind of hazy, cloudy. All you're doing is hearing things. And this is where it all comes into focus and we start seeing. And why do we see these things? Why is it that a believer who puts their faith in Jesus gets this vision of Zion, or this spiritual place, gets to come to this spiritual place, whereas those who followed Moses in the wilderness didn't get this?
But they had to have that in order for us to get it. It's
Right.
part of the foundation.
It's
or
part of the foundation, yeah, but we have to have something in order to get here. We have to have faith, right? And it's by faith that we believe that this exists and that one day it will be physically real, right? So this is, we have to have Jesus, right? We have to be
Yes.
trusting. And remember that, and we'll look at this a little bit as we walk through our review, but remember that what was missing for these people? When they came to this mountain, what was missing? It was not united with
The Holy Spirit.
faith.
Faith.
They didn't have the same faith, right? But here we have the faith. And so we get to see this city, this New Jerusalem, this Mount Zion, this spiritual place. So it's just,
That's why we can, when we read it, we can get so excited and our
Yeah.
heart just leaps,
Yeah.
and, because it's real to us. It's the truth, and they can't see it. So if they're not a believer, they just read it and
They don't get it,
they don't
right?
get it at all.
yeah.
But we do, and we get so excited.
Yeah, all of those clouds, all of that fire, all the smoke, all of that mist and haze and darkness and gloom, it's gone. And it's like scales coming off of our eyes, right? That we see this picture of the entire concept of redemption, right? That started all the way back at the beginning and he'll carry it through until the end, right? And so we
No
get
fear.
this wonderful, yes, we can do it without fear, right? Okay, so The question on day 5, because we did some other things, so I don't want you to think that those days weren't important. But the question on day 5 was basically, how do we live in light of this place that we have come to, right? And so we're here. And if we're seeing all these things, right, and if we will physically be there someday, how are we to live now in light of the fact that this is our station in life? This is where we're camped, right here. We get to see all of this stuff. And so what they had us do, at least how I interpreted the question, was they had us go back through and review Hebrews chapter by chapter, but we were keeping in mind the verses in Hebrews 12, 28 through 29. Would someone mind reading Hebrews 12, verses 28 and 29?
Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire.
And so what they had us do as we were doing our homework was to go back through chapter by chapter and figure out the ways that we can show gratitude and we can offer to God acceptable service with reverence and awe. And so I thought this might be hard in some chapters, but honestly, I found something for each and every chapter of how that we can change our lives. And so I thought what we do is we just walk through that, and that's what we should be doing. And you may have done it in a very summary form, and you may have done it chapter by chapter. But we're going to walk through it chapter by chapter and kind of talk about the things that we've seen. So let's walk the Hebrews road looking at these things together. And what I thought you might want to do as we're doing this, I'm going to erase Mount Sinai because we're not there. Praise the Lord, we're not there. So bye-bye, Mount Sinai. You have told us many wonderful things, but we have a better mountain, right? And so what I thought, if you're taking notes or if you're writing down what's here on the board and you wanted to, you could write how we approach this mountain or how we live in light of this mountain. So you could put it at the feet of the mountain or whatever, but it's going to be a longer list, so however you want to do it. Okay, so let's start in chapter 1. And let's think about what it tells us about offering to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe, and how we can show gratitude. Did you see anything in chapter 1? I'm pulling out my observation worksheets and going all the way back to the beginning. Do you remember what chapter 1's about? It's been a long time. We see Jesus represented as the now way, whereas the prophets spoke in old times in many forms, in many ways, but now in these last days, God has spoken in His Son, right? So He is now God's means of speaking. And that was just in the first few verses. And then it compared Him to a specific group of created beings. What did it compare?
Oh, the angels.
Yeah, so it compares Him to the angels, and it talks about the relationship that the Son has to the Father, right? And what does He say in verse 8 of the Son?
His throne is forever and ever. So He must be king.
He must be king, and His righteous scepter is the scepter of His kingdom. So what do we do in light of this knowledge? How do we show gratitude to God, or how do we offer acceptable service in light of the truth of the Son being a king?
Worshiping.
We worship him. We are subject to him,
I was going
right?
to say we obey him.
We obey him, right? And then if we back into 9, where it says, you have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness, we could also offer him service by saying, I love what you love, Lord, and I hate what you hate, Lord. And that would be, I love righteousness, and I hate lawlessness. I hate this sin, right? And so that would be another way that we could, in our hearts, offer him worship, right? Offer him service. What if we skip down to verse 13? What's
He
gonna
seated
happen?
Jesus at his right hand.
Yeah, and what's going to happen?
He put his enemies under his feet.
Right, so is that a forward-looking thing? Right? Now, is this a forward-looking thing too, this Mount
Yes.
Zion?
Yeah.
Yeah, because right now it's
It's forward-looking
spiritual.
for us.
Yes, it's forward-looking for us because right now it's spiritual,
Yeah,
but
right.
someday it will be
Right.
physical, right?
Right.
We will actually see this. And so one of the things that we want to keep in mind when we are looking at Hebrews is that it is a very forward-looking book. Eyes on Jesus, eyes on the prize. And where is Jesus? He's in heaven. Where are we going to go? Heaven. So we've got to keep our focus there, right? So how, in light of the fact that he will be seated at God's right hand until he makes his enemies a footstool for his feet, how do we then live in light of that? How do we live in light of the future? Holy. Yeah, we're subject to him, right? And we look forward in hope, right? That we don't lose that. And so that's where he comes to in the next chapter. Now, one of the best ways that we can identify the things that we are to do in light of all the truth of where we are spiritually is to look at the exhortations. Because remember,
Yeah.
this book is a book of exhortation. So what's that first exhortation in Hebrews 2?
Oh, pay close attention to what we've said, what you've
Yeah,
heard.
yeah, we must pay much
don't
closer
drift away.
attention as to what we have heard so that we don't drift away. So what have we heard? Do you remember what it talked about in the first chapter? That he used to speak in many forms and many ways, but now he has spoken in his Son.
Oh.
What does he say?
Salvation.
Yeah, he says, this is the way. I am the way, the truth, and
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
Listen to me, right? And even the Father came down and said, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. And that's what he's saying in that first chapter. So this is him. Don't go anywhere else, right? Listen, we need to pay much closer attention. And so how do we pay much closer attention to the words of Jesus? Practically.
We do it. We listen and we do what he said.
Yeah, well,
We
where do
obey.
I get it? Is he going to come down and tell me
Oh,
exactly what
through
to
his
do?
word.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I've got to get in his word and
Right.
I've got to abide. And that will be part of my acceptable worship to God, right?
Right.
Is to know it and to do it, right? To study it and to live it. And so, what about the rest of chapter 2? What is chapter 2 talking about?
Well, Jesus becoming man,
Right.
conquering death.
Right, and he becomes like who? In all things.
What, flesh and blood?
Yeah, he becomes us, right?
Right.
And and what does he call us in this? This is so great. What does he call us? He calls us children and he calls us brethren,
Mhm.
right? He will stand in the congregation among his brethren and he will proclaim, right? So are we his?
Yes.
Yeah.
How do we live in light of that?
We obey him.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's always going to come down to
Yeah.
obedience, right? Because what does our faith cause us to do, Jane, like you just
Drift
said?
nowhere.
I'm sorry?
Oh, was I ahead of you? Was that about the drift part?
Oh,
What
no,
does that
well,
cause us to do?
well, yeah, what does our faith cause us
Oh.
to do? Not our not paying attention, but what does our faith cause us to do?
Give constant attention to the word.
Right, and we also obey. right?
Yeah.
We step out in that faith and we
right.
say, what I found in your word, that will I do, right? Despite the circumstances, despite the hardships, despite all of that, I will be obedient. And so we're going to see that theme over and over and over. Do you think that obedience is acceptable worship to God?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, because he says in, I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but he says that, this chapter, I'm way ahead, we'll get there. I'm like chapters ahead. Okay, so let's look at chapter 3. What is the exhortation there in chapter 3 at the beginning?
To stay faithful. Oh, I mean, do not harden your hearts.
Yeah, well, there's that one, but there's also that first one that's also our theme for the book in verse 1.
Heeding the word of Jesus is our key to rest.
Oh, ooh, I like that.
I just wrote down, encouragement to stay
Yes.
faithful to enter.
Consider Jesus. Remember, that's our theme.
Oh.
So, therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, this heavenly calling right here, right? This is our
Yes.
calling. Consider Jesus. And how does he say to consider him, right? How does he describe him right there?
High priest, the apostle and high priest.
Yeah, the apostle and high priest of our confession. And he was faithful to him who appointed him, and he's a faithful servant. And so, what does that mean when it just tells me consider Jesus? Do you remember what it was that we were supposed to do? Show gratitude with reverence and awe? Is that calling him for who he is, right? You are apostle and high priest of my confession, and I praise you for them, right? And so sometimes we just stop and worship, right? Sometimes application is so simple, it's believing him and worshiping him for it, right? So it's not like some complicated, I've got to figure out all the sin in my life and get rid of it.
No.
Because it's there and we're going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But we're talking about offering an acceptable service to God. And what does he want? He wants our hearts, right? He doesn't just want the fruit of our lips, he wants the fruit of our hearts. But part of our hearts, when we read this about Jesus, just cries out and says, oh yes, Lord, thank you that you sent your son to be high priest and apostle of our confession. So we just worship him, right? Now, Jane, I'm ready for the next exhortation that you were a little ahead of me in verse 8.
Oh,
You
to
had it.
stay faithful? Is that the one? No, I don't know.
You said do not harden your hearts, right? You did tell me that,
Okay.
didn't you?
Oh, yeah, up
Did you
here,
say that?
yeah,
Okay.
it's up here in
Okay.
brackets, so I read it. Do not harden your hearts.
Okay, and so he says, do not harden your hearts as
Okay,
when they
if I remember
provoked me, as in the day of trial in the wilderness. And so we saw this mountain that we erased because we don't need it anymore. But it was our example in chapter 3 of let's not be like them, right? Because what did they do? They hardened their hearts. Right, yeah. And they provoked God to anger. So how do I make sure that I'm offering to God a spiritual service of worship?
Worshiping him, not provoking him to anger.
Right.
By hardening my heart against what he tells me.
Right, and how would I harden my heart? Because they did it within a matter of hours, right? I mean, it doesn't seem like it has to take very long.
No, it doesn't.
Right?
It takes, one time.
Right, and then it's not being softened to that sin, right? So it's when they're rebuked, maybe they do confess, but if they go right back to it, right? So I need to be part of my worship and service to God is that when he quickens me, when he disciplines me, when he convicts me of sin, I lay that aside. That's one of those encumbrances that I lay aside and I just go, I'm going to just press on. I'm going to accept the forgiveness and all of that, and I'm going to get right, but I'm going to keep moving, right? And so that's part of the not hardening your hearts. It's getting right back on the right path, right?
And you may have to do that.
A number of
over and
times.
over
Yeah.
and over
Yes.
in a day until you are, because the discipline of the Lord hurts,
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
if you're really sensitive and you repent and you get back on the right path and don't stray
Don't
again,
stray. That's
He
wonderful.
makes quick work out of it.
Yes.
And
But some of us are a little more stubborn than others, right?
Anyway, but what I love is the fact that we can, even if we jump off and back on, we can. He
Yes.
loves us so much. He's so glad when we get it right.
Yes.
And he so loves it when we're in that fellowship.
Right, and now he also then gives us another exhortation about taking care of our hearts in verse 12 of chapter 3. And what's the exhortation there?
Well, I don't like the evil and unbelieving heart part.
Right, and he says, take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. So if I want the opposite of that, I want to make sure that I don't have that, right? What do I need to do? How do I get a not evil heart? How do I get a good heart?
We just have to keep our eyes on Jesus and obey him step by step.
Right, and that's my only hope, right?
Yeah.
That's what he's pointing them to. This is the only way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're going to have an evil and unbelieving
Yeah.
heart. Without Jesus,
Yeah.
there's no way, right? So it's
Right.
pointing them and pointing us straight to Jesus. Yes, Sheila.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, body,
Yes.
whatever it is. It's like with your children, you have that love for them. You can't possibly have a hard heart towards your children or your, as they come in, they're, and even throughout life, no matter what happens, and you notice that most children, regardless of what their parents do, deep down inside, they have that love for them. And the Bible said too is to honor your parents, and that there's no stipulations. It doesn't say if they
When they do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you're to love them in the Lord.
Yes,
too.
yes. Now, what does an unbelieving heart do? According to verse 12.
Falls away.
So I need to make sure that I have a believing heart. How do I show God my belief?
By obeying.
By being
Yeah.
obedient. I mean, it's always going
Yes.
to be inextricably linked to,
Obedience.
it is not my obedience that saves me,
No.
right? But it is, I am saved, I trust fully in God, and I trust fully in Jesus. Therefore, I'm going to walk, I'm going to do exactly what He tells me to do because He's that good,
It's
right?
the proof of our belief.
Right, right, and it
It's
just
not what
yeah.
saves us, but it's the proof that we truly believe.
Yeah.
If we are obedient.
Yeah, and so it's and he connects it on
Right.
almost every chapter, every time he talks about it, that this faith goes with this obedience. It is always, always, always going to be together. Where there is faith, there is obedience. Where there is a lack of faith, there is disobedience, right?
Well, Genesis 3.
Yeah.
Adam and Eve, it's the same thing.
And here we
It's
are.
always belief, and here we are.
Okay, and then one last time in chapter, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself already. Now, what is instead of making sure, okay, it's not really a contrast, but it is kind of a contrast. It says, take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil and unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. So that's contrasted to verse 13, but
Encourage one another day by day.
Right. Encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be
Hardened by the deceitfulness of sin.
right. So it's that same thing that the author of Hebrews is doing. He is demonstrating to them in letter form what he wants them to do, which is to come alongside and say, I love you, and we're going to walk this road together, right? We're in this together. Lay aside those encumbrances, and let's move towards Jesus, right? And so that's what our job is. And that's how we can offer acceptable service to God, don't you think? I mean, if we're coming alongside His children and encouraging them to be obedient to Him, that's just a beautiful thing, right? Okay, and then one last time in 15, he says, do not harden your hearts, right? And so we need to make sure. Now, why is it that he's constantly in chapter 3 telling us to be sure that we don't have an evil and believing heart, make sure our heart is not hardened? Are we in danger of having our hearts hardened?
Yeah, evidently.
Yeah, and as we go through Hebrews, we discover that there are those that walk beside us on this road that will walk away. Right? Does that, and we talked about all that and all that goes with that, right? Does that mean that they were ever His? Well, you know how I feel with it. So we're not going to go down that road, but what I'm saying is that there's a danger. And that's the danger that was facing the Hebrew believers. Remember, they had persecution without, but they had struggles within. And those within struggles were the drifting, were the falling away, that they could come short of the grace of God, right?
Well, I was just saying, I don't want to go down that path, and so I'm not going to take us down there. However, I'm overwhelmed sometimes with, and I think it's in a positive way, with the magnitude of God's Word, that, you know what, we don't see it clearly. And I think there are some things that it's better for us to go, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yes.
And I'm not going to take any chances. You know what I'm saying? I really do. I think that He wants for us to realize how big and true, and there are bigger words. Holy He is, and I don't want to lose it, and I don't want to mess it up, and I'm not going to argue with you about whether I can or not. I just want to make sure I don't.
Right.
You know?
I totally agree with that, because it is.
I think we have to be careful.
It's a gut level.
Because some people go, I can't.
Right, it's a heart check, right? And that's really what he's offering there, is just make sure.
Yeah.
Whether you think that you could completely fall away, or whether you think that you can never fall away and I can live any old way I want to, right?
How are you living right now?
What is the heart check?
Exactly.
Make sure that you do not have an evil and unbelieving heart. That's I'm going to make sure, right? And we talked about that last week too, that sometimes we forget to make it personal, because it is that we so often. But he is saying, make sure that none of you have an evil and unbelieving heart. So when I read that, I need to say, Leah, make sure you do not have. I do not have an uneven or unbelieving heart. And then once I've done that gut check and I'm walking with the Lord, I don't have to worry about it anymore, right? I'm just keep on.
But I'm going to make sure I walk on and obey.
Yes, that's exactly.
And you're going to help me if I have trouble, because you're going to come alongside me.
Yes, and that's what the body. I mean, he is demonstrating what the body is supposed to do in this letter, and then telling them, and do it too, right?
Yeah.
So you check yourself,
Exactly.
you check those around you, encourage those around you, and let's just walk this road together, right?
And that's what you're doing, and you're not saying, Sally, sit right here.
Yeah.
You come together, you study the Word together, you live in the Word. You don't know until you move away what you have.
Yeah.
And this class could explode because of what you have.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because we live in this world that we live in, fewer hearts are undertaking to study this hard and live this way. But it's golden what you have,
absolutely.
and to watch you stand here and pour out yourself and you study. I get to Sheila, she's got her workout, she's doing homework every second that she's not doing something else, and I just have to encourage you, because I'm sitting here going
Get that sponge out.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this heart gut check is so important. And it's really easy if you aren't here, if you're out making something else a priority and you don't have people coming around you, it's real easy just the whole
It
day's gone and
is,
you
yeah.
haven't checked your heart, you
Yeah.
haven't done anything except watch TV and dust the floor.
Right, well, and there's also.
And I don't dust.
And I don't dust either, so you know what I did.
He mentions the deceitfulness of sin, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it is so, persnickety is not the word, but.
I like that.
But I like the word persnickety. It's sneaky, right? It's laying right there at the door, and it is ready
Yes.
to pounce, right? And it is ready to come in and take over, should it get the opportunity, right? And so we have to just check that heart. We have to be doing that work on our hearts. We have to be getting into the Word. We have to be paying much closer attention, and it is always about eyes on Jesus. And that's what's so wonderful about the author of Hebrews. He is pointing us to Jesus every step of the way. It's never well, let me tell you how my life is, and let me tell you what's so wonderful about what I do in my life. It's eyes on Jesus, right?
I love that.
But, and last week we did that column on the sin or in
Yeah.
our life
Yes,
and so forth.
yes.
We really didn't get into it in the class, and I think you kind of didn't know whether people wanted to talk about it or
Right.
not. But this is in direct contrast to that list. I mean, that just
Yes.
popped into my head right now too.
Yes.
But because and I think you were the only one that said
That I'm lazy? Yeah, I said that.
And, but it might have been a good thing to talk about it, because then that just brought into my mind procrastination. And
Why are you looking at me?
Why are you talking to me? No, and that's so true, Sheila, because what is going on here, what we did last week was we talked about those things that need to be put off, that need to be laid aside
Yes.
and not picked up. But this week, we're talking about how
Yeah.
we should live.
Yeah.
And so they are the put-ons, right?
Right.
So it is that contrast, because we laid that stuff aside last week, right? Now, we may have decided to pick some of that stuff back up this week, right? And we do, right? But the encouragement of the author of Hebrews is continue to lay that aside, right? Keep laying it aside and keep pressing on. And so sometimes we can get caught up too in that laying aside. I need
Yes.
don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. That we forget that I need to be living. And sometimes we need to put our focus on
Jesus.
the how to live, the real way to
Right,
live, as opposed to the way not
Not
to do
to,
it.
yeah.
I need to focus on the way to do it. I know that's a real temptation in my life. I remember when Drew and I first got married, I would tell him, I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to do this, is all the things that I thought, were just horrible about marriages and stuff. And yes, I knew that I didn't want to do those
Yeah.
things. But what I really and came to realize over time was that I really needed to say, how do I want our marriage to look? How do I want me in my role as your wife to look? I want it to look like this, as opposed to, well, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that. Well, what am I going to do?
That makes
right?
me think of the, that makes me think
Yeah.
of the story, or not story, but the idea that counterfeit people who work on the positive side to get counterfeiters and that kind of stuff, that what they do is they study real money.
Yes.
And they
Not
get
the
to know it, they
counterfeits.
don't look at the counterfeit
Right.
stuff. They study the real money and know exactly what it looks like. And then they are able to identify counterfeit. But they don't study the counterfeit, they study the real. And that's what makes me think of.
Yeah, I mean, and because for me, what I needed to get my focus off of is all the marriages
Is the good.
that I thought were bad, and look at God's word
Yeah.
and how does it tell me
To
to
be,
live
right.
as a wife to my
Right.
husband. And so that's very similar to what's going on. We need to
Yeah.
pay much closer
Yeah.
attention to what we know to be true, which is
Yeah.
the word that Jesus spoke, and lay that other stuff aside. And that's what he goes on to say,
Yeah.
and we're not
Yeah.
going to get there. But he's talking about laying aside that law, right? Because this is better. What we have is better. You
right.
don't need that law anymore. Don't be tempted to get back underneath that as they were.
Right.
But eyes on Jesus, just focus on him, right? Listen to his words and be obedient to his words, right? So it's it's so neat because this entire book is just a masterpiece,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like every last book of the Bible, right? Because it's written by God and it's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
You know, and it's tried and it's tested and it is perfect. And so we come to chapter 4, and what is the very first verse? We have an exhortation.
Mm-hmm.
What is the exhortation in chapter 4, verse 1?
Well, it says, let us fear, but then I'm trying to go, okay, fear what? To be
Fear
sure
what?
that we enter his rest, I guess.
Right, and so who are we to fear?
Jesus.
Right, we're supposed to fear God, right? So it's fear God. So is that part of reverence and awe?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's that acceptable service with reverence and awe that he talks about in chapter 12, verses 28 and 29. So that's just real simple, right? I have to believe God is, and part of believing that God is believing what he says about himself is true, right? And so that's part of fearing him, reverencing him, believing he is who he says he is. And then that's where it says, Hebrews 4 is where it says in verse 2, for indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, and they are the ones at the bottom of Mount Sinai.
Mhm.
But the word they heard did not profit them. Why?
Because they didn't have faith to go with
Yeah,
it.
it wasn't united in faith. So
Mhm.
it's not just that I hear,
Mhm.
it's that I have to put faith
Mhm.
with it, and I have to, how do I show my faith?
By obeying.
By obeying. And so then he goes on in chapter 4 to talk about why they didn't enter the rest. Why did they not enter the rest? I mean, at the very base level, why is it that they don't enter rest?
They don't believe, I guess.
They don't obey, right? So they don't believe, and so they don't obey.
I was gonna say,
right?
yeah, if you.
They messed up all over the
Yeah,
place, right?
right.
So as soon as Moses comes down from the mountain, what are they doing?
Worshiping
Oh,
God.
they're making a false
Yeah,
idol.
yeah. So they messed up big time, and then we have story after story after
Yeah.
story of disobedience
Yeah.
during this wandering time, and so he tells them, "You're not this generation that I have brought out of Egypt and brought into this wilderness. You're not going in, right?
You're right.
They don't get to go in, and even Moses doesn't get to go in."
Yeah.
And so he's saying, "Be careful
Yeah.
that as long as there's still a rest, because we get a rest too, because it follows the pattern, right? So we have a rest that remains. So make sure that you enter the rest." Well, how do I make sure that I enter the rest? Same way they did.
Yeah.
Faith.
Obedience and
Obedience.
faith, right? I've got to step forward in obedience. And so he's saying, don't harden your hearts like they did. Don't be disobedient like they were. And then in verse 14 of chapter 4, what does he say? What's the exhortation there?
Which verse did you say?
Verse 14. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. Verse 11, what's the exhortation there?
Let us be diligent,
To what?
follow, let's see, so that no one will fall through following the same example. We have to obey, be diligent to obey.
Yeah, be diligent to enter that rest. And how
Yeah.
do I get there? Just what I was just saying.
Being obedient.
Be obedient. If I'm not obedient, do I get to go into the rest? No.
Because it proves your unbelief.
Yes, yes,
That's the thing.
yes.
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
the
it's
thing. Yes,
Unbelief.
yes.
Bottom line,
Yeah,
belief, heaven,
Yeah.
rest.
It's
Yeah.
all connected,
Yeah.
right? Every time it's
Every
connected.
time.
It's never separated,
No.
right? It's not a, I say I believe, and you can't look at my life because I said I believe,
Yeah, exactly,
right?
exactly.
It's, I believe, and you can look at my life, and it's not perfect, but I am walking in faith, and I am trying to be as obedient as I can, and when I fall, I
Yeah.
get back up, I talk to God about it, I get that forgiveness, and I keep moving, right? I keep stepping in obedience. And so then 14, what is the
Hold fast.
exhortation there?
hold
Yes.
fast our confession.
Let us hold fast our confession. And that is a lot about that endurance. And that becomes a theme that the author of Hebrews develops. That it is, again, it's not a one-time decision for Jesus, right? but it is a
Right.
life lived, pointed in his direction.
Right.
It is walking toward him. It's not a raising of the hand and a walking of the aisle on Sunday, Easter Sunday,
Yeah.
right? It's what happens after Easter Sunday, right? That life lived. And so I have to hold fast my confession. And then verse 16, what's the exhortation there?
Draw near.
I have to draw near. And so it's, I've got everything and I am headed toward the prize, right? I'm headed toward the throne. And so what do I get at the throne of grace?
Mercy
Mercy and grace.
and grace in the time of need.
Isn't that just wonderful? Because he tells us exactly where to go. And it's not to all the other places that we could be tempted to go. We go straight to the throne of grace to receive mercy and grace in the time of need. And it is just sweet when we get what we need from that throne, right? It's so wonderful. And all those other things, all those other places that we would be tempted to go, they're just not even worth it. They're not even worth thinking about when we think about this throne that we sit at, that we come and we get real mercy and real grace, right? So, okay, I'm going to stop because we could go on for the entire day, and we want to get to the video.
Yeah.
So, it's so good. It's
Yeah,
so
I
good.
love it.
I hope that if you didn't get the opportunity to walk chapter by chapter through
Yeah.
the book of Hebrews and do this, look at the exhortations.
Yeah, I didn't, and I'm really enjoying it, so I need to go back and do
because
that.
I think what's going to happen is
I was busy.
that I was too. But what's going to happen is your view of the entire
Yeah.
book is going to
Yeah.
crystallize.
Yeah.
And you're going
That's
to
what's
see,
happening.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're going to see all of those themes
Yeah.
and the purpose of the book just being dragged all the way through.
Yeah.
And it's just so exciting because
Yeah.
what we thought when we first looked at the book of Hebrews was that all that exhortation, we saw exhortations a little bit here and there, but that all that exhortation kind of is condensed into chapter
Yeah.
12 and chapter
Yeah.
13. But oh no, we've got a lot of application to do all the way through the book. But take heart in that it is less about the put-offs, because
Yes.
he has so few verses in this book where he says, don't do this. But he does something more active where he says, make sure this happens. Do this. Be doing these things.
How to
And
live
so
your
we
life.
and we can focus on that instead of focusing on the things that so easily entangle us and the things that just should have been laid aside anyway, right? Just forget about it, right? So it's just, it's a beautiful book. And I do encourage you, if you get the time, because this next week we're going to be finishing up. This is our last week of the whole book. And so we'll be in chapter 13. We'll be kind of pulling it all together. And so hopefully, if you didn't get a chance to do what we just started to do, you'll get a chance to do it. Okay, let's take a break.
All right.